Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next session. Please take your seats. Before we go into the topic of this session, I have been asked to announce 3 organizational questions. First, everybody is invited to the dinner later, the lunch, in the Latvian War Museum. For the same reason, this is the second point, we have to be sharp on time. So we have to discipline ourselves a little bit to have our discussion finished at 12:30. And the third thing is that obviously someone this morning lost in his car his mobile phone. And whoever lost it, there is one mobile phone at the reception to pick up. Now, for the panel of today, there is hardly a more timely issue to discuss than European integration in Eastern Europe. The Vilnius summit may become in this respect a watershed. For nearly a decade now, after the enlargements of 2004, 2007, the European Union has struggled to find a strategy which will both meet the European aspirations of the neighbors in the East, some of them at least, and on the other hand, the European interest to extend stability and promote European values in Eastern Europe. I think it is safe to say that for all sides involved, these expectations have not fully been met. Nevertheless, it is particularly the EU's offer for a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, which has now become a very dividing issue. There is no question that with DCFTA, the economic and perhaps in the future also the political integration of Eastern European countries and the European Union will increase significantly. But we should also admit that, of course, this may come as an expense of Russia's economic and potentially also political integration within the CIS space. And we all know that Russia has responded with setting up its own integration models, with Belarus and Kazakhstan, the customs union first, and more recently, the Eurasian Union. And we are, I think, now in a situation where it is not NATO enlargement anymore, but the competition between Eurasian integration and European integration, which is the one defining geopolitical issue in Eastern Europe. And we have to face this reality. Now, this kind of competition has increased very much the pressure on all countries in Eastern Europe, both externally and domestically, and it has put all of these countries into difficult dilemmas. Just a few days ago, Armenia, of course, has chosen to join the customs union, which of course is not compatible with DCFTA. Now in that situation, we can expect that before the Vilnius summit, actually the tensions are rising. So what questions would we try, or should we try, to answer today? I think the first question is, of course, what to expect from Vilnius. Who will be in Vilnius? Who will sign or paraphrase what? The second question is there any possibility to make good perhaps for past failures, to engage Russia and to bridge this kind of competition, so to at least reduce these dividing issues between both integration models. The third question is, of course, what comes ahead? What will the European Union deliver? How will the European Union perhaps better meet the aspiration of Eastern European countries? What is the way from Riga, if you want to say, to Riga? Where are we standing when Latvia has the EU presidency? Now, we have to address this question a panel of very distinguished speakers. The first, Andrius Kubilius, who over the last 15 years, I think, was either Prime Minister of Lithuania or preparing to be Prime Minister of Lithuania by being leader of the opposition. We have Maia Panjikidze, Foreign Minister of Georgia. We have from Belarus, Alena Kupchyna, and Iulian Groza, the Deputy Prime Minister of Moldova, and last not least, Andrii Olefirov, the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Ukraine. Now, just making one final remark about myself, I'm here as a foreign policy advisor, correctly speaking, in the German Bundestag, but I'm also an advisor to the Prime Minister of Moldova. So Moldova, in that respect, is a little bit overrepresented here, which of course fits perfectly the size and importance of the country in the Eastern Partnership. But mentioning this, if you look upon all these problems, European integration and the interests coming with it, from the perspective of Berlin and the perspective from Kupchyna, of course, you have a very different picture. And so we have inside views and outside views, and we would like to start with an inside view. The inside view from Lithuania. Lithuania has spent a lot of resources and energy, not only in preparing the Vilnius summit, but also to give new impulses to EU's policy in Eastern Europe. And so I would like first Mr. Kubilius to give us an impression of what does Lithuania expect from Vilnius and what is the way ahead.
Well, thanks a lot, and really it's again pleasure to be here in Riga conference, and especially on this panel. And I shall try very briefly to say some my personal thoughts, what we would like to see in Vilnius summit, but in a little bit more broader way. I will try to describe. Of course, there are a lot of technical details, all the negotiations and things like that. Perhaps everybody knows which country is more successful, which not. Just a week ago, Armenia was considered as one of the most advanced countries in negotiations, but as we all understand, things are not the most important things perhaps are not in all those technical details. So, of course, countries like Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia needs to do their homework to resolve all the technical issues, to come closer to European values, especially with so-called issues of selective justice and so on and so on. But why we consider Eastern Partnership policy as one of the most important policies of European Union at the moment. That is what we need to always have in mind. And I think that sometimes in all those details on free trade agreements, visa liberalization, association agreements, we are losing the whole picture. And perhaps we can thank in some way President Putin that with his activity in trying to resist Eastern Partnership policy success, he is showing how Russia is considering this policy as very important. And I think that that can make us in Europe, that can assist us in Europe to understand in a broader picture why Eastern Partnership policy is so important. And sometimes perhaps the name of Eastern Partnership policy is a little bit misleading. I think that we can name this as an EU policy towards Russia. And here I think we need to understand why this policy is so important. When we are talking about successes of historical successes of European Union, sometimes we're talking quite a lot about economical issues, economical developments, and so on and so on. But of course, if you look from the very beginning, the biggest success of European Union was to bring peace into continent of Europe, to resolve, let's say, German-France conflict, and so on and so on. But if you look from historical point of view, of course, there is still one historical problematic area which is not resolved, and this is relation between of continental Europe and Russia. And I think that Eastern Partnership policy is exactly an attempt, and which can be a very effective attempt, to assist Russia to overcome its internal historical problems. Russia is suffering, still suffering, big problems, which I will, in a very simple way, I'm calling always post-imperial syndrome, with a lot of temptation to go back to the territories which historically belonged to Russia, to Soviet Union, and that is what makes really life in this region quite difficult. for the countries, for Europe itself, and for Russia especially. So, and in order to assist Russia from that point of view, of course, is an obligation of continental Europe to create such a policy which would bring this region, which is just now in between of Europe and Russia, closer to Europe, and to diminish potential of temptation in Russia itself to go back with all the imperial nostalgia to that region. So that is what is really a major strategic goal which we have in mind when we are talking about Vilnius Summit and Eastern Partnership policy. And sometimes I am quite, how to say, it's a little bit pity that sometimes in big capitals of Europe, it looks like that there is a lack of understanding of this very important period of time and importance of Eastern Partnership policy, not just looking into all the technical details, but in understanding of this geopolitical picture and the mission which is in the hands of Europe, really to resolve this still not resolved problem of the relations in between of Europe and Russia, and assisting Russia in a most effective way to become much more European country, much more country with European values, and so on and so on. So when yesterday we were discussing in the late night session Russian developments, somebody used really a very proper metaphor using the words of that Russia is like wounded grizzly. Yes, that's exactly what is happening. And we see it exactly just now. We saw the pressure which President Putin by himself is devoting a lot of time, traveling to Baku, now inviting Armenian president, sending Rogozin to Moldova, going to Ukraine, and so on and so on. Yes, that is a behavior of wounded grizzly. Question is very simple. We do not see President Rampui, we do not see Commission President Barroso, or even Madame Ashton reacting in a proper way to the behavior of wounded grizzly. That is what I think would be very important waiting for Vilnius Summit.
Thank you very much. But if I may interfere with one brief question respecting what you have just said. You said it is also, an opportunity for Russia, if I understood you correctly. Now, Russia is not part of the Eastern Partnership, and DCFTA, of course, leaves Russia out. If you look at that from Russian foreign policy interest, when it comes to the question on who is better able to integrate the CIS space economically, Russia has something to lose. I think this is something which we can admit. So how to bridge that? How to make sure that EU integration in Eastern Europe and Russia's interest in keeping its own economic and political relations with CIS countries, how to make sure that we can bridge that somehow?
Well, I think that if you look into, I'm trying to understand what Russia has in mind and what is a priority of Russian authorities at the moment when they are looking into such countries like Ukraine, Moldova, or Georgia, or other Eastern Partnership countries. And I don't think that the biggest priority for them is economical integration. I think that still the biggest priority is geopolitical influence, geopolitical zone of interest, what they are calling, and that is what they are looking for. So, and that is where we need to see that Europe needs to take responsible steps forward in having in mind that what Europe is doing with Eastern Partnership policy is an assistance to Russia. Assistance to Russia, which present Russian authorities are trying to avoid. But it's a responsibility of Europe, really, to look into a longer-term perspective. And that is why I think that, well, we need to go forward, even when Russia is really showing that they are not very happy with such a policy which Europe is implementing just now.
Thank you. You spoke about the geopolitical implication of that kind of competition, and I think it is safe to say that Georgia has been in the very focus of these competitions, following a very, very strong course of pro-Western integration, adding NATO integration to EU integration goals. Now, what does Georgia expect now from Vilnius, and what are your expectations for the way ahead?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference, which gives me the chance to share our views with you and to speak about Georgia's expectations. You started or you ended with the question, what will be in Vilnius, who will come to Vilnius, and what will be there? So I can answer very shortly this question. Georgia will come to Vilnius, and Georgia hopes to initiate the association agreement. What we did is that we finished the work on the text of association agreement already in July, and we hope very much that the technical procedures in Europe these months which are left until Vilnius will be enough to make ready the text for initialing. This is our hope because, as we said several times, I mean the current government, the European and Euro-Atlantic choice is the choice of the Georgian people because we share the values on which the European Union and NATO are based, and we think that the process of integration is sometimes more important than the goal which we want to achieve, because if we fulfill the criteria for the European and Euro-Atlantic integration, we will have in the end the country we desire, a country which is free, which is based on democratic principles, where human rights are protected, where the judiciary is free, where the democratic institutions are strong, and where the economy is free. And then I think it will be a natural and normal process of more integration into the European and Euro-Atlantic structures. This is what we expect in Vilnius, and we hope very much that our partners see the progress achieved by Georgia in the same way as we. This is our expectation. And then after Vilnius, we, of course, hope to sign the association agreement as soon as possible, maybe in Riga or maybe before, and to continue our way to Europe. It's very simple. And Mr. Kubilius described very good the situation, and the pressure from Russia is very obvious. In this situation, we need more support from the European Union. We need more stronger signals from the European Union that the Eastern Partnership is something very serious for the European Union itself. I always say that Europe should see us not as neighbors of Europe, but as a European neighbors, and open the European perspective for countries like Georgia, because this is our only way, and this is, if you want, our red line when we speak with Russia. And I'm sure many people here are interested in our relationship with Russia. You know that after the coalition Georgian Dream won the elections, the Prime Minister declared that one of the priorities of our foreign policy is to improve the relationship with Russia, but without damaging the national interests of Georgia and without questioning the foreign orientation of Georgia, which is, as I said, European and Euro-Atlantic integration. We try to improve this relationship, but it's not easy. We have some progress, some positive dynamics in the trade, economy, and humanitarian, also cultural issues, but we have no progress, for example, in Geneva, where we discuss with Russia the issues of security, the fulfillment of ceasefire agreement from August 2008, when we discussed the return of IDPs and refugees to their homes. We are very thankful to the European Union because they play a very important role in Geneva because they maintain the EUMM, EU monitoring mission in Georgia, which is the only international instrument to monitor the situation, unfortunately not in the occupied regions, but on the occupation line. Of course, the support from the European Union, the support of the European way of Georgia is an important signal towards Russia too, and we need to strengthen this signal. This is what we think before Vilnius. But Georgia is still occupied by Russia. 20% of our territories are occupied. Russia recognized the independence of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and some other countries did the same. And our policy is to continue the non-recognition policy, and we are also very thankful to the European Union, which supports the non-recognition policy of occupied territories of Georgia, and for the support in the IDP resolution in the General Assembly of UN. So it means that European Union is the major player in our region for Georgia, and it's a very natural desire of the Georgian people and, of course, of the Georgian government to come closer to the European Union. These are our expectations. There are some more concrete, for example, on visa liberalization, which is an important issue for us, for DCFTA, which is an integral part of the association agreement. And we hope that after Vilnius, everything what we will agree in Vilnius will become effective and will start functioning. And the main principle of the integration, to get more for more, is something very important. So what we need is the recognition of the progress made by Georgia, made by the Georgian government, and adequate reaction from the European Union, and a strong signal that this way, this European way of Georgia is accepted and welcomed by the European Union too.
Thank you very much. I think it is a good idea now to switch a little bit to perspective and talk about the perspectives of Belarus. Belarus is a founding country of the customs union with a couple of controversies with the European Union in the past. We have for a long time discussed all the crises within the European Union, the controversies and conflicts there. Just recently we have learned that not everything is in order in the customs union also, the controversies between Belarus Kali and Ural Kali, and some harsh statements made by President Lukashenko. So that's a relief, at least to us Europeans, that, well, the rest of the world doesn't live in quite a more advanced harmony too. But coming to Belarus and its perspective on the Eastern Partnership and its expectations for Vilnius and the way ahead, what is your point of view?
Thank you very much. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here. It's very interesting to participate in such a renowned event as the Riga conference. Thank you. As far as the Belarusian experience is concerned, we see that nowadays, at present, this very important initiative of Eastern Partnership lacks viability. And it is really at a very important crossroads. It lacks equality, it lacks mutual trust, it lacks solidarity. So, we see Vilnius summit as a very good possibility, maybe to try together to overcome these very important shortcomings. You know that Belarus enjoys a very special place in the Eastern Partnership Program, and it is not our fault because we were invited as an equal partner, and we are still prepared to do on equal terms with other partners and with EU. But anyway, our European agenda is much less ambitious, maybe more down to earth. Than European agendas of other partners. Our European agenda is about rebuilding trust. It is on capitalizing on our neighborhood with EU. It is about cooperating wherever my country, Belarus, and EU find it useful. But please note, if this very modest agenda is successfully implemented, it may pave the way to deeper and more sophisticated engagement. This is why, keeping in mind the existing disagreement, difficulties in our relationship with the European Union, I would prefer to focus and to invite our European partners to focus on more strategic issues. And these issues are the future place of Belarus in Europe, as well as the expansion of European presence in Belarus. Vilnius summit is considered by us largely as a test for both European Union's Eastern Partnership's credibility and capacity to provide for equal, pragmatic, and demand-driven cooperation between Eastern partners and European Union. And we hope that Vilnius summit will help us, or it will be helpful in addressing three major, even chronic weaknesses of Eastern Partnership. And in our vision, these chronic weaknesses is multilateral track of cooperation, its project activities of Eastern Partnership, and business dimension. Very important for us also, and this is even the most essential thing to be said here, that Eastern Partnership should in no way be about creating new dividing lines between Eastern partners and with outer world. It should not be a cause of confrontation. It should not give ground for a kind of suspicion and concerns. I would like to make special emphasis on this issue as to Belarus. The only way to strengthen our sovereign European identity and to keep evolving into a modern, competitive, responsible democracy is to assert and capitalize on our natural belonging to both Western and Eastern integration models. As a gateway between customs union and European Union, Belarus is very keen of making this neighborhood to be very successful. And we are not chasing quite elusive EU membership. We stake on more realistic and pragmatic concept, and this concept is concept of integrating integrations. Now, the boundary of Belarus and Poland, between Belarus and Poland, is the only and the last customs checkpoint on the quite vital Rotterdam-Vladivostok trade route, And when they forego internal controls, goods can start circulating freely between Baltic, Black Sea, Caspian, and Pacific ports. And through our cooperation with the European Union, my country seeks to establish or to develop our normative, institutional, infrastructural preparedness within the context of this new role of my country as a juncture between customs union and European Union. For us, these two integration models, they are not competitive. I mean, they are not about competition. They're complementary projects. And we need to see the European future in broader terms. It's my profound conviction. And we cannot accept consideration of Eastern Partnership countries as a kind of buffer zone between Europe and Russia. We are Europe. We are too Europe. And despite of EU intentions in Belarus, we continue to build European society. We're deeply rooted in Europe, and we will remain European states, sovereign European independent states. While we are just proposing cooperation both to the east and to the west. What else? And Eastern Partnership could be very helpful in promoting this cooperation between these two integration models for us. But it is very essential also to state that it will be very wrong, to my opinion, or it is very wrong, that European Union holds out prospects of absolutely natural cooperation to Belarus, to my country, on the same politically steep terms as it holds out prospects of membership to aspirant countries. You know, dialogue and cooperation, unlike formal accession or formal association, is not something that could be awarded or then taken back. I think that in Europe you should consider this issue, and we are prepared to re-engage with the EU. We are prepared to serve this bridge or juncture between two integration models, and I think that it's a high time to start to rebuild trust, to rebuild confidence instead of barriers. Thank you.
Thank you. You spoke about that Eurasian and European integration models should not create no dividing lines. Now, one country for which this surely at the moment is a very concrete problem is Ukraine, I think. So Ukraine is ready to sign DCFTA with the European Union. Is the European Union ready to sign? There are a couple of questions, electoral code, judicial reforms, the Tymoshenko case, and so on. But there may be also on both sides a more broader misconception, with the Ukraine perhaps thinking that it has the strategic importance that the European Union in the end will sign anyway, and the European Union thinking that European integration is so important for the Ukraine that the Ukraine will sign anyway and does what the European Union wants in advance. Now, we still have this open question of what is actually happening in Vilnius with respect to the Ukraine, which has first finalized all the negotiations, is ready to sign, as I said. So what are your expectations? What is the Ukraine wanting from Vilnius and after Vilnius?
Well, let me thank you, the Riga conference, for inviting me here and actually to share Ukraine's ideas about Vilnius summit and, the whole policy in the region. Well, you rightly mentioned our biggest expectation is to sign the association agreement. For Ukraine, it will be a point of no return. It's also not a secret. And we have, on my strong belief, we have everything for that, starting from both on a logical and a legislative level. Let me start with the legislative level. So in order not to, and I'm glad that 3 years ago, Ukrainian, almost unanimously MPs, they adopted law on external and internal policy of Ukraine. It is clear-cut stated in that law that Ukraine's long-term goal is to join the European Union. That was made, and I'm glad it was made, in order to not to change the course of the biggest by territory country geographically, European country. So there is no doubt that we are committed to join the EU as a long-term perspective. So now, when we're talking about Vilnius summit, we're talking about short-term perspective. So speaking about this perspective, we started to prepare for the Vilnius summit, even though we didn't know that it would take us 5 years to be prepared to sign the association agreement. We were the first to start negotiations about the association agreement and DCFTA as an integral part of that agreement. It was in 2007, so it took not only us, it took our EU partners 5 years to negotiate and finally to put initials last year on that agreement. So that's speaking about logical issues. So for us it's logical. If we have a long-term perspective, full-fledged membership in the EU, so we should be prepared for that membership. How? Through the association agreement. Association agreement is not something like a gift given to Ukraine. Or maybe it's a gift, but we've been waiting for that, and we've been working to get that gift for 5 years, as I mentioned. So for me, the basic assumption is that we sign the association agreement during the Vilnius summit. I've just mentioned the what have been done for 5 years, but in the course of last year, in accordance with our commitments taken during the EU-Ukraine summit in February, we've done a lot. on three different dimensions mentioned at that summit. The reform of legislative, the reform of justice, the reform of our electoral legislation, and you rightly mentioned the Tymoshenko case. But just a couple of days ago, the former presidents Kwasniewski and Cox have visited Ukraine for the 20th time, just for the last half year. That means, and because their mission have recently been extended, that means that we've been productive in solving all the issues which are on the table. Let's remind that there were other issues of so-called, I don't call that, selective justice. The President of Ukraine pardoned former ministers Filipchuk and Lutsenko. So just last week, actually this week, the Ukrainian parliament have adopted different laws vis-à-vis our European aspirations. So I'm sure that we are going to be successful in signing the association agreement, being a role model for our partners, for those aspiring states within the Eastern Partnership program. But for me, the most important thing is what's next, what's after Vilnius, and what's actually what will be the achievements of Riga summit, Eastern Partnership Summit in 2015. So for me, now it's the two-way road. I've mentioned our commitments, and for us, the association agreement is a really and the biggest transformation tool to transform Ukrainian society and to be competitive. Because for me, the association agreement, and especially DCFTA part of that, the key word is competitiveness, is whether we want or won't be competitive. And if you want to be competitive, you look at, the biggest and brightest, the partners which you can take something and share something with them, and not the weakest part. Now just a few words about our relations with Russia and the compatibility of both Eurasian economic integration and the association agreement. Well, let me remind you that, as I mentioned, joining the EU is a long-term perspective. We are talking about association agreement, we are talking about DCFTA. So if we look at our relations with Russia, we have a visa-free regime with Russia starting from 1991. We have FTA signed with them starting from 1993. So practically what we are willing to do with the European Union is to make sure that we have a visa-free regime, which we have with Russia for more than 20 years, and free trade agreement, which we have with Russia for more than 20 years. That's natural. It's the century of liberalization. We want to liberalize both with the regime and our trade regime with the European Union. Yes, it took us more, but actually there is nothing new about that. We have the same with Russia already. Thank you.
Thank you. Moldova. Moldova has been for a long time actually been held as a success story of the Eastern Partnership, but then there had been a long row of political crises. Constitutional crisis, early new elections in 2010, a more recent political crisis this year. Moldova was a country where there was broad support for European integration. Now we have a very polarized country on that, with support for European integration dropping to a little bit more than 50% of the electorate, and the leader of the strongest opposition party comparing the European Union with Nazi Germany and European integration with a new Barbarossa plan directed against Russia. So how will Moldova proceed? Will Moldova stick to its European course?
Sure, Martin, of course. Thank you very much to you and to Riga conference organizers. It's both a challenge and an opportunity for me to share with you our vision ahead of Vilnius and beyond to Riga. It's always challenging as well to talk among the last speakers. It's at the same time it's easier probably. But let me start with a few points. First one, you referred to political crisis in Moldova. My opinion is that amidst political crisis, Moldova managed to ensure a sustainable reform process to have a track record in implementation of our commitments with the European Union, and to stick to our European agenda of reforms. Paradoxically, this political crisis made Moldova more democratic, more open, more transparent. Now about the European agenda. What we want is to actually to stick to reforms in the judiciary, home affairs, prosecutor's office, actually to fight corruption. That's the key. Why? We want that because we want to make Moldova more attractive to investment, to growth. And we actually aim to transform the country, take into account the best model we have in Europe, the European Union. Now, let me talk a little bit about the spheres of influence. Martin a little bit referred to that, and former Prime Minister, of course, referred to that. And I saw in the Twitter different mentioning that we're talking more about Russia than about Eastern Partnership. Moldova is a sovereign country, and we don't want to be treated as a territory of spheres of influence. We want to be at least treated at equal, if not at least respected. And I'm happy to say that Russian Federation said very clearly that they respect the sovereign choice of Moldova to go to the European Union. And that's also important, at least officially. Now, Eastern Partnership, probably the best policy of the European Union in the neighborhood. After 4 years, I think we've progressed a lot. Now we need to be forward-looking, creative, to learn lessons and deliver to our commitments. This leads me actually to my next point, Vilnius. In Vilnius, we all know what are the deliverables. In case of Moldova, we want to initiate the association agreement and DCFTA. We will initiate it. And of course, we want clear response to the effort of reforms that Moldova has been with throughout the last years within the visa dialogue. We've implemented, we are very well progressing, we are very well advanced in the second phase of the Visa Liberalization Action Plan. It takes to us a bit of effort, but as well to pay a little bit of high prices. Now, of course, what we want to see delivering from the European Union. And of course, we expect immediately after the Vilnius summit to finalize all the processes linked to the signature of the agreement as soon as possible. And of course, we hope that Ukraine will sign the agreement and Georgia will initiate it. We need to have Armenia in, of course. But at the same time, we need to respect the sovereign choices of each country. Undoubtedly, Eastern Partnership offered for us a clear, basically, objective that we are basically coming to implementation. It's political association and economic integration. Again, this offers for countries like Moldova opportunities for investment, for growth. I can tell you that, for example, it also gives you the feeling of solidarity. And Moldova is already feeling that, being part of the energy community. And energy example is a very good one. Because there we feel ourselves supported very clearly by the European Commission and the European Union in our debate with our Russian partners. And now you know that Moldova just launched the works on the new pipeline interconnection to connect Moldova with the European Union. And this is only to ensure alternatives and to ensure independence of choice of supply of energy resources to Moldova. Moldova being dependent 100% of energy from one supplier. And let me also basically go a little bit to one point before concluding. My conclusion is that we don't have much time in order to reach the point of no return, or how I called it, the irreversibility point. It's important that we try to deliver in the next year as much as possible to the objectives we have set all for us. We need to sign the association agreement in this FTA, and for Moldova it's really important to seal this agreement in our legal framework. That will ensure, again, no return with our European agenda. Summit in Vilnius, as Commissioner Füle said, will be or should be a game changer. And I believe in that, and we need to be forward-looking there. And we already need to talk about what we will do in Riga, because 2 years of time from Vilnius to Riga is not much. This why this leads actually to my last point. We all need more determination. Both European Union needs more determination in political courage to take decisions, forward-looking decisions, to ensure further integration of the willing and able and ready countries. And second, of course, we need determination for the Eastern Partnership countries. Determination in doing reforms to deliver consistent and sustainable reforms that will ensure transformation of this country according to the best model. So in Riga, we hope that we will get the backup from the European Union for the strategic objectives, for the European strategic objectives of the aspiring countries. And one more point about communication. Eastern Partnership is a policy of the European Union, but at the same time it brings with it changes, opportunities, and we need to communicate it very well, not only among the partners, but I think more importantly to the people living in these countries. We need to give to our people not only a hope and a European dream for those who want to join the European Union, but as well immediate, basically, support of their expectations. And again, visa liberalization is one thing that could be done, political association, economic integration, and the forward-looking, basically, approach to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We shall now open the debate to the audience. We have quite a couple of questions. Microphones. This gentleman here. I think we collect a couple of questions right now, as we are limited in time and have 5 speakers. Please just introduce yourself for a second.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Andrius. I have more comments than questions. I used to be a deputy foreign minister of Belarus, and I resigned on the eve of referendum of 1996 because there was a danger that the power will be usurped by Lukashenko and Belarus will head a different way from what it started to do in the beginning, in the early 90s. The danger implemented. Then I started my life as the opposition activist, facing harassment, intimidation, attacks, imprisonment, detention. Then in 2008 I co-founded the civil campaign European Belarus, and on this platform I ran in presidential elections of 2010. And believe me, it was supported very strongly by Belarusian people, this kind of platform, because it was not only my views and my political strategy, but also shared by many other democratic leaders, including presidential candidates. For this, and only for this, I was beaten, arrested, and put in prison in 2010. Because, as I said, the large number of people did support this. So, and there is a lot of importance that people in Belarus pay to European Union, to Eastern Partnership. But here in Riga we see the representative of a criminal regime on the panel. The Riga conference used to be a venue for discussing values. And believe me, it did help us in Belarus. Because the open discussion of values and support, even token support statements, did help to survive inside Belarus, did help democratic forces in Belarus. And the signals that are sent from this Riga conference, I think they will be interpreted in a different way in Belarus, in my country. Believe me, despite all the dramatic differences between the situation in Syria and in Belarus, what's happening there and what's happening in Belarus is of the same nature. Dictator is destroying the people of the country. And without resolute support of values, without resolute support and resolute actions to support values, we will achieve nothing. And I think we're talking about Russia, and it concerns Russia also. So I think that I don't envy Deputy Minister role here, because she is appointed as yet another liberal to try to sell the regime, the dictatorship, to the West. Not for the sake of changes inside Belarus, but for the sake of getting money from Europe, getting more money to support the regime, the dictatorship. So I think that Vilnius summit is really extremely important for us. And Latvia is known to be softer on the Belarusian, on the regime in Belarus, claiming that it has business interest and it has to listen to the business lobby in the country. I have a bad news for Latvian government. I was in prison, I was in penal colony, and I met a number of businessmen from Russia, from Ukraine, from Poland, from Lithuania, and from Latvia. They were trying to do business in Belarus. Some of them guaranteed by the regime that they will have special conditions, and they were deprived of their business, they were put in jail, and even in jail they are being blackmailed. So if the government of Latvia and government of other, especially our neighboring countries, want to protect their business, they have to think bigger. They have to think of creating favorable environment in its neighborhood. And it's possible because the leverage European Union has is there. And it was shown by I also have good news. Sanctions do work. Me and my colleague, closest friends, were released because European Union in March 2012 took resolute decision to introduce sanctions. Unfortunately, that's the only language that the regime understands. The Prague Declaration claims that the partners are committed to the principles of international law, including the rule of law, democracy, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. It doesn't say about equality with the dictator. It states clearly the commitment to the principles. And I'm really encouraged to hear the interventions of Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova that is moving in this direction. So it will be extremely important, not only even for Belarus, but for Europe itself and for European partnership at Vilnius summit to show this commitment to the principles and not vice versa, and not to the appeasement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very clear message. Unless there is no direct response, I think we take up a question. The gentleman in the back, I think, was first.
Amit Lajavardi. Thank you for your presentations. In the agenda, it's written that the promise of integration and connectedness with willing partners to the east of Europe seems to have lost its earlier momentum. Do you agree with this? If so, why? And what has caused it? And if you will, what steps can be taken to reverse the momentum?
Can you please, to whom, I have not really got to whom you have addressed that question. Anyone? Okay. Next question was over there. Do you have a microphone?
Thank you. I would like to follow up on the issue that Prime Minister Kubilius has raised, the response to Russian pressure on Eastern Partnership countries. Of course, as Prime Minister Kubilius rightly noted, the aspirant countries, the Eastern Partnership countries, must do their homework. with selective justice. It's important, as this panel shows vividly, the better way, the European way, is to have ex-prime ministers on the panel in the Riga conference, not in jail. It's clear, I think. But going back to a Russian issue, I think it's obvious that this pressure will continue before Vilnius and after. And before Riga and maybe after Riga. So the foreign minister of Georgia has clearly described all the trouble the new Georgian government is getting from Russia. I would just add that as a response to the new Georgian government's attempt to normalize the relationship, a legitimate attempt, the response of the Kremlin was to move the occupation line deeper in Georgian territory. A very, very troubling development, putting the new Georgian government under enormous pressure domestically and raising security problems, serious security problems. So my question is semi-rhetorical. Prime Minister Kubilius, do you think we will see a high-level response to a persistent and consistent pressure from President Putin on all the countries, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine? If not, why not? If yes, just encourage us, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we take one more comment. I have seen somebody here on the left side. No more comment, please. Just a
very short comment and then question at the same time to the whole panel. My name is Eka Trashelashvili. I'm from Georgia. I think one comment when we hear frequently about Russia being wounded grisly is not really correct. Russia is not acting irrationally or emotionally, and it's the time when we see Russia that licked the wounds, I guess, as the grizzly, if we compare it to the grizzly, and acts very rationally to recover and then to take its own revenge, basically, if it thinks of being damaged from the wounds that it received from the West in that respect. So how seriously that is being taken in the West as being very systemic and rational is still a question to me. Seeing the reactions to the decision of Armenia and the announcements when it comes to the joining Eurasian Union, being surprised by that decision has been a surprise to me. Why that was that much of a surprise if anybody was following the process too closely, what was happening in the region. So we still suffer from this very strong asymmetry of interests and determination to act when we compare Russia to the European Union. So what is the moment when as a game changer that could come to the EU, when we could see more of a real strategic interest in the countries of the Eastern Partnership countries, and then take out the whole process from being the process-oriented and being strategic when we speak about the countries in the region? Is it possible to take off taboo from the word EU perspective for the countries who want to have that perspective being valid for them? Because not all of the members of the Eastern Partnership share, as we see and hear it today as well, that being the goal for themselves. And how much EU is ready to be more invested in the developments of the countries that want to have more investment from the EU for the real and profound transformation when it comes to the political transformation, political pluralism, inclusiveness, rule of law, and economic transformation as well, because we've seen, and then you've experienced here as well, obviously in the Baltic countries, that aspirant countries being in the process of EU integration had much different, obviously, engagement and investment from the side of the EU and the member countries, because the perspective was clear. Countries were getting into the Union, so the stakes were much higher, obviously. So what we could expect being in that process, and as Georgia being willing to have that perspective valid for itself, to expect more of an investment for all the goals that would us bring not only closer to the European Union, but then being part of the European Union over the time.
Thank you very much. I think we will give the word now back to the panelists, but before this I would like to add two questions from the Young Diplomacy Professionals Forum. It relates closely to what we have already discussed and what your question is about. The first question is, how can European integration coexist with Eurasian integration? And is there a more common basis in these two competing conceptions? And the second question, which I read as it is written here, what will be the next reactions of Georgia, Moldova, the Ukraine? And I quote that literally, after Russia pressures Armenia's decision to join the customs union. Well, Well, having said that, and refer to many of the other questions, of course, a pity that we don't have a Russian representative here to discuss with us. Nevertheless, let's try to find some of the answers. I think most of the questions were actually directed to all of the panelists, and I would just suggest that we now follow a reverse order in commenting, perhaps with Iulian starting.
Thank you very much for these questions. I try to be brief. First, losing momentum. In short, I will say that not. We still didn't lose the momentum. But we're right in the very near point of losing it if we don't are more determined, more clear in what we want and how we want to achieve that, so that nobody has interpretative statements or understanding of it. It's clear that there are countries who are willing to join the European Union. It's clear that countries who are not and want to have a more intense cooperation with the EU. My country is part of that group of countries that is willing to join the European Union, not for the sake of joining the European Union, but we know that it is the best model to be transformed, to ensure prosperity, stability, and growth, and rule of law in your country. Second, about antagonization debate. I hope that I'm young enough to see the moment when we will forget about talking in a Cold War syndrome way. I mean, we need to understand that when a country or an entity wants they choose the way to go. For example, if Moldova wants to be with the EU, this doesn't mean that Moldova is against someone. This is, of course, it's our choice to how to develop ourselves. Because we have been in Soviet Union for many years, and we want to be in the EU because we think that's the best model. On Eurasian integration and European integration. So far, frankly, Martin, I don't see any Eurasian integration. I know it's a plan to be in place since 2015. So now I don't see anything in there. There are debates, there are things. There is an idea to try to use the European model of integration and to copy-paste it on the Eurasian Union. So we need to wish good luck to our partners who are willing to do that. What's our reaction to Armenia announcement? Frankly, we will have to look into that because we don't have an Armenian representative here, so probably it's not politically correct to make any statements before having discussions with our partner. And we will have that opportunity next week in Yerevan when we will have this Eastern Partnership informal ministerial. Probably we will understand better the choices of Yerevan and why they choose to make that statement. And we will all know exactly where we're heading from that, being very, very close to the summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, Mr. Olefirov.
Well, I do believe that momentum is here. But then again, I'm sure that if we don't sign the association agreement and our colleagues from Georgia and Moldova don't put their initials on the agreement, that will be the time of lost opportunities. Because we all know with the elections in the European Parliament, with elections in Ukraine, so on and so forth, it will take us even further than the Riga summit in order to see where we are. As to the compatibility, well, to my knowledge, as of today, the 50% of all trade turnover between Russia and other countries, so 50% is the EU member states. And in the same time, the trade turnover between, the part of Ukraine's in that trade turnover between Russia and other states is just 5%. So Russia, as a member of Customs Union and the European Union, 50%. Well, is there interference? Is there, non-compatibility? The answer is, it's a rhetorical question. So I think we should proceed with trading within the WTO rules. And, we see, and for me it's the best example. If the United States and the European Union started to negotiate the conclusion of the FTA, That means for me that it's the best way how to negotiate, how to liberalize the trade. And as to the what we expect, for instance, in Ukraine, from like reaction from the European Union between Vilnius and Riga, as I mentioned, assuming that we sign and our colleagues put the initials on the respective association agreements. So I would, it's nothing new in that, and I agree with with the lady who asked the last question that membership perspective, it's not a secret, is the key driving force for the aspiring states, and there is no doubt about that. So I doubt that the Vilnius summit will pay greater attention for the membership issue. But I do believe, it's one of my strong beliefs, that by the Riga summit, this issue will greatly mature. And we will talk about the membership perspective in Riga. Then again, we do expect the adequate financing for 2014-2020 because it's these commitments within the DCFTA and the association agreement, it takes not just a lot of effort, but a lot of financial assistance. And last but not the least, the mobility, the wider mobility of people. It's not a secret that, in the first stage of the implementation of DCFTA, the weaker economics, they might lose in order to gain afterwards. So for Moldovan, Georgian, Ukrainian society, it is very important to have clear-cut signal that we have membership perspective, and second, that and it's we are talking about mobility. I'm not talking about long-term, but short-term perspective. We just have to show that the EU is with us and they pay attention to our commitments. But then again, they have commitments from their side.
Thank you. Belarus and such conferences usually has not always the most easiest task, but I think this is precisely why it is good to have you here.
Yes, thank you, but it's an exciting task, really, Eastern Partnership is losing its momentum. One of the reasons of that is very controversial interest of the Eastern partners, of course, and different aspirations of Eastern partners towards EU membership or etc. But the main reason, as I see it, this is the lack of strategic vision or even absence of strategy with regard to Eastern Partnership countries on behalf of the European Union. It's interesting, when I came to Riga, I looked through the presentation. It was a presentation of research on the 5th of September here, research done by former head of Marshall Foundation and presentation was given by the Latvian Minister of Foreign Affairs about the vision of Europe, European integration in 2025. 4 scenarios, no mentioning of CIS countries at all, no mentioning of any Eastern Partnership country. Nothing. Just EU, big players, and Russia. This is the issue of strategic approach. What can we expect? If we are asking for some kind of assistance, please just assist and be honest in this assistance. And don't just be only demanding. I think that in terms of this Armenian declaration recently made, we need to retain Eastern Partnership Program as a very flexible format, which could be enabling us to meet interests both of countries who are seeking membership in the EU and of those who are just prepared to build up relationship with the EU along another track or in other scenarios. And we need to respect, as my Moldovan colleague said, choice of the country, which is proceeding, for sure, from the interest of the people of this country. We also proceeding from the interest of Belarusian people because, and I'm here just not to send any kind of signals to you, to Riga conference or to expert community. I'm here just to give you opportunity to have more fresh information, new information about my country, not that not everything in my country is gray, black and white. So we are living normal life, we are normal people, and never Belarusian evidence such high standard of living in terms of economic and social standards as we evidence now, never. We are traveling abroad. We are number one as to the quantity of Schengen visa per capita, despite the price of 60 euros in comparison with 35 for Russians and Ukrainians, etc. So we are living normal life. And I think that this lack of strategic vision on the part of EU is crucial to give to provide some kind of viability to the Eastern Partnership Program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Panjikidze.
Yeah, unfortunately, we also had a feeling in the last few months that the Eastern Partnership has lost his momentum. And I think it's very important what I said before, that we need to see during Vilnius that the Eastern European countries are as important for the European Union as for us, the European Union. Because sometimes we have the feeling that nobody really believed that the Eastern Partnership countries can fulfill the criteria to initial the association agreement, especially with the CFTA visa liberalization action plan. But because we did our homework, as I said, we need now the recognition from the European Union. And the signal that we are as important for the European Union as the European Union is important for us is something what we expect in Vilnius. Without that signal, it will really lose its importance. And we need a clear statement in Vilnius that the European perspective can be opened for countries like Georgia, because I remember the discussion during the work on the text of association agreement, is Georgia a European country or a European state? And then we found a definition that Georgia is an Eastern European country, because some member states of the European Union thought if they would declare Georgia as a European state, it could mean the promise of membership of the European Union in the next future, and the Union is not ready for enlargement and cannot respond to this wish of Eastern Partnership countries. But we need a clear message in Vilnius that countries which are willing to integrate their state into the European Union and feel themselves as European countries have a perspective and can be described as European countries.
Perhaps as we are running out of time, to Mr. Kubilius in particular the question, how can the European Union increase its support to Eastern European countries who wish to have a closer association and future also membership with the Euro, how to have a more coherent strategy from the point of view of the European Union?
Well, I think that, first of all, of course, there is a very strategic need, both in the capitals of Europe, of Union, and in the capitals of Eastern Partnership countries, to have very clear vision and very clear strategy. When I am listening to statements that Eastern Partnership is losing its momentum, and from some representatives of Eastern Partnership countries, I see some kind of similarity which was what we were feeling at some moments back, let's say in 1995, especially when EU was criticizing us that we were not behaving according to EU standards. Always we were complaining that EU is losing momentum towards us. So let's be very frank. There are some problems in Eastern Partnership countries, especially with selective justice, where the demands from EU is very precise and very important. And I remember very well we had some let's say, naive thoughts back in 1995 that we can negotiate on some issues with the EU, trying to convince that, let's say, for example, we had quite a painful issue on closure of old Soviet-type nuclear power plant. We spent something like 2 years or 3 years having some naive thoughts that we can in some way overcome EU very strong position. Then we were forced really by ourselves to understand that it's a mistake. We need to make our own decision. We need to stick to the rules. That is also very important for Eastern Partnership countries at the moment. I was quite afraid a little bit, or let's say some time ago, especially during the spring, that really the momentum, the losing of the momentum is happening in some capitals of EU because of the problems in Eastern Partnership countries. We were paying a lot of attention. We were making a lot of attempts to convince some big capitals not to lose the momentum because some governments are making mistakes in Eastern Partnership countries. Luckily, just now I see that more and more understanding in big capitals of the geopolitical significance of the momentum is coming back. But don't make mistakes before Vilnius summit, which would bring again, some bureaucracies in old capitals again hesitating, what to do. So that is one very important issue. Then, of course, Mr. Sannikov is absolutely right. Belarus, we know everything. We know everybody here that with European values in Belarus of today, situation is very clear. There is no need to discuss what is happening. So, but Eastern Partnership program can be of very important assistance to Belarus with authorities which they have and with their attitude towards human rights, to democracy, and so on, if Europe will succeed, for example, with Ukraine. Bringing Ukraine closer to Europe. I think that it would be a very important signal to Belarus to go out from that strategic mistake, which Belarusian authorities at the moment is really still keeping. So that is again very clear why I think that participation of Belarus in Eastern Partnership program, of course on a much lower level, is important when we're looking towards a strategic future. And of course, again, when we're talking about what is next and Riga summit and membership perspective, of course, all of us, especially in that region, we have very clear long-term vision, but long-term vision. Really, those countries which want to join Europe should have such a possibility. But we need to understand all the problems in Europe and how slowly such an idea can develop. So let's have some patience. Let's keep going on. Let's move step by step forward. And I am quite sure that in a longer-term perspective, this region also will become an integral part of European structures. And that is why I think that what we are starting to do in Vilnius summit and then we shall continue in Riga summit is really of a very great importance, not only for the region, not only for the countries of Eastern Partnership program, but especially for the whole Europe. Because Europe needs to resolve still not resolved problem which in the history always created big problems for Europe, for our region. That is a normal relation in between of continental Europe and Russia.
Thank you. Now we are left with only 5 minutes, so we can only take very, very few and brief statements. I have here Artis Pabriks, who wanted to say a word.
Yes, thank you, dear panelists. I definitely can accept some kind of confusion and critics regarding the position of European Union with Eastern Partnership, because obviously economic crisis, the questions about our internal merging or integration, as well as questions about further enlargement of EU are not easy questions for member countries. But at the same time, you could very much assist us by shaping not only Vilnius summit but also the upcoming Latvian presidency in 2015, if you as representatives of Eastern Partnership countries would really give a clear message. What do you want? How do you see the perspective and vision of your countries? And not only to give a clear message, but to uphold these words also with deeds. And for instance, if I'm looking to the Belarusian case, I sometimes wonder, I mean, do you want to continue to the life as you are living up to now, which seems to be comfortable enough for at least some part of population, or you want to change something? If you want to change something, then obviously you have partners within EU and within the Baltics. On the other hand, if you are looking, for instance, from my perspective now as a Minister of Defense, we know there are upcoming maneuvers of Zapad 2013, and we can see that as far as militarily, then Belarus is basically here very much dependent on the integration process with Russia. Is that a vision what you want to proceed also further or not? And as far as the other countries, I really would comment that lately we can see that Moldovan case is really upholding those words with the deeds. There is a straight wish, but we also can see that there is immediately play of this zero-sum game from your Eastern partners. So I really would wish, in order to have a better position in EU and to assist you, to have a clear vision from your side. What do you want and how do you keep your deeds? Thank you.
Thank you very much. One last question from the gentleman here, and then we come to our final conclusions.
Thank you. Ojas Kalniņš from the Latvian Parliament. Both Georgia and Moldova have unresolved territorial issues. Some in Europe think this is a hindrance to a speedy integration into Europe, and yet this didn't prevent Cyprus from joining. How do you see it? Will integration into Europe help you resolve these problems? Will it delay it, or are they irrelevant or independent of your plans to integrate?
Yeah, perhaps Moldova and Georgia will answer this question first.
I think the answer is very easy, because the European integration will help to develop the country and will make the country attractive for everybody, for Abkhaz and Ossetians too. And this will help them to express maybe their wish to be part of our society in the future.
Let me build on that, and thank you for your question, Honourable Member of Parliament. Indeed, it's easy, because on one hand, but it's complicated on the other. Again, the integration process that Moldova is embarked on with the European Union, it's for all its citizens, residing on all its territory, including the Transnistria region. Probably integration of Moldova to the EU is probably the best confidence-building measure in the settlement process of the Transnistrian conflict. And all the reforms we are doing is basically for getting Moldova with the EU, and that our citizens are benefiting from the opportunities in the EU. One of them, very simple one, is visa liberalization. That we understand is very important. This is why we do important reforms at home. This is why we are delivering, and this is why we think it's important that EU could also deliver and send not only a message, but also in deeds, very concrete support, both for our European integration agenda, but as well for our citizens who are willing to be part of the EU. And at the end of the day, that will be, as I said at the beginning, a very good, on-the-ground confidence-building measure.
Thank you very much. In order to finish as much as possible in time, I would now just to ask the Remaining panelists, whether of you would like to add a final conclusion, please.
Thank you. It's not a final conclusion. It's just a kind of reaction to the comment or question that was just asked to me. So, you know, we are going to continue to build our sovereign state, to develop, to strengthen our statehood, and to assert our European identity. And I count very much that we will have partners in EU in the spirit of solidarity and trust. As far as these military maneuvers is concerned, so you know that Latvia received invitation to observe them in the spirit of transparency. Being, of course, in a very deep integration with Russia and being dependent on Russia on a number of economic factors, dramatically, we are trying to pursue a very transparent, good neighborly policy and relationship with all our neighbors, and we also will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Well, Mr. Minister just talked about the deeds, so I would, speaking about not all the Eastern Partnership country, but Ukraine in particular, which I am honored to represent here today. So I would encourage our EU partners, while thinking about the association agreement and the ECFTA and future agreements and future cooperation, to look at the deeds of my country, not just in the course of the last year or 2 years. Ukraine used to have the third world nuclear armament, and we gave up that nuclear armament freely and willingly. It was our goodwill. Then, just 3 years ago, we gave up highly enriched uranium. That was also our goodwill. Now, we were able to not to allow any protracted conflicts in potentially, especially in Crimea, and instead we've been very active in helping to solve other protracted conflicts, like in the format 5+2 with Transnistria. So please look at the deeds, but not at the deeds of 2 or 3 years, because even for not if we are talking not just about the country, so about the human life, 3 years or 2 years is nothing. Let's look at and have broader picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kubilius, you have now the chance for this 10 seconds last statement.
Vilnius summit will be a success.
Thank you very much.